I unboxed this Mbox Studio about 3 months ago. I've played around with it, and I think I'm ready to tell you my thoughts on it. There's some things about this interface that I wish Avid would have either included or just not included at all before putting it out on the market. My name's Alex, welcome to another video. If you're new here, welcome to Mountain Label Music. Before we get into the bad, let's talk about what this interface actually does have to offer. And if you haven't seen my unboxing video, I highly recommend going to check that out whenever you get the chance or before watching this video. Number one, clean preamps. If you're looking for an ultra clean system with both clean inputs and outputs, the Mbox has it. Really, any Avid interface that has been made after 2020 has been relatively good on making sure the A to D conversion is very clean. This interface sounds very similar to my Matrix Studio that I'm using in my Atmos rig. Number two, the amount of I/O. If you use external hardware, this interface has got a lot of extra inputs to be able to allow for that. MIDI in and out, FX loops, 4 XLR inputs, primary and secondary stereo monitor outputs, along with Bluetooth in and out, with 2 additional independently customizable headphone outputs. It's crazy good. And if you're the kind of person that likes recording amps and using amp simulation, it has a designated high-Z output that goes to your amplifier. And you even have a built-in tuner, high-Z inputs, and a variable high-Z configuration for those ports. Now, I don't use my tube amp very often, but I think this is a great feature for anybody that does guitar tracking online or maybe in their own studio and you got people bringing their own amps and you still want to have that actual tube amp feel while still using your guitar amp simulators in your DAW. Number three, 4 dual function customizable buttons. You can use these for soloing, muting, bypass effects, disabling EQ to your DAW, full interface preset configuration, and so much more. The dual functionality allows you to have a single press function along with a press and hold, theoretically actually giving you a total of 8 functions total. You can also customize the color of each of these buttons to whatever fits your needs. To me, the buttons are super handy if you have various presets that you're using because your studio has multiple roles than just mixing, recording, or whatever it may be. Again, very similar to the Matrix Studio and having the monitor profile presets, but I think Avid did a good job on making this a lot simpler. Aside from that, it's pretty much like any other interface on the market. Now to get into the not so good. Now, of course, there are going to be drawbacks for every interface on the market, and some interfaces are going to be better suited for other people. These are just my preferences and what I've noticed that I kind of didn't realize when purchasing the interface that it was going to be an issue. And I don't want to say I feel cheated for this interface because I paid a lot of money and I got additional bonuses along with it for the sale that Sweetwater has going on. And I'll get more into that in just a second. But this is an expensive interface. And I feel like with the amount of money I spent on this interface, I could have gotten something else that was just as good, if not better. First off, the effects. You have a delay and a reverb. Both great effects. Having a built-in EQ and a reverb are both handy, especially when tracking. Now, I don't typically use an EQ on an interface, but I could see where it could be handy. And the reverb does come in handy when the singer needs to be a little more confident in their singing and you put them in a little more immersive headspace, and it just gives more confidence all around. But why include these features and no compression? If this interface is geared towards young producers and young mix engineers, we need to just have the essentials. I like mixing with compression on the way in. I like tracking with compression on the way in. Even if I don't use the compression that is actually going into the monitoring. Hardly ever do I actually need delay though. In my opinion, I think delay is a little more distracting than maybe reverb. It's a cool feature, but honestly, it seems kind of pointless for my needs. Let me know what you guys think about this feature. Do you guys track with delay? Why do you track with delay? Is there something I'm missing? Let me know down in the comments. But back to the compression thing, even my UAD interface that was $300 comes with 3 different presets for compression, along with some analog emulation presets. I also got $300 value worth of UAD plugins that isn't necessarily supported with that interface, but I can use within my DAW for only $300. And I guess it's unfair for me to compare these interfaces, but it just shows your priorities in what's more beneficial to you in your studio. Both are very niche options for very different producers and mix engineers, but you get my point. And to be fair, one of the main reasons why I purchased the Mbox Studio was because Sweetwater was giving away a deal for Pro Tools Studio perpetual licenses, and you got one for free when you bought this interface. So I guess you're still kind of getting some kind of benefit when purchasing it. You're paying $600 for an interface and getting $600 worth of software with it. And if you're wanting to get into the Pro Tools ecosystem and need an upgrade on a decent interface, this is actually one hell of a deal. Especially if you're someone like me that hates subscription services and you just want a perpetual license. Great deal overall. I'm surprised the Mbox didn't include any kind of DSP processing like the Avid Carbon does, which allows you to use AAX DSP plugins in your interface. And I think it would be a great addition, especially for such a bulky size interface. Which leads me on to our second discrepancy, the size. It's bulky. The pictures on Sweetwater really don't do justice for how big this interface actually is. And I really don't know anybody that's measuring out their interfaces to make sure it fits on their desk. Or maybe that's just something I probably should do more often. Regardless, this interface is huge. Of course, if you're gonna need all that I/O that I mentioned earlier, you're probably gonna need a larger interface anyways. For some, this may not be an issue. If you have a few pieces of rack mounted hardware, or you don't have any more space in your racks to be able to put another interface, this is a good way to go. And maybe what I'm referring to is less about how actually big the interface is, but how much graphics user interface it takes up on the top panel, especially for the amount of real estate it takes up just for this unique look. Because even having an interface this big, you could have probably gotten away with putting smaller controls on the front and having all of your I/O on the back. It's definitely interesting. Again, this is just a personal preference. Let's move on. The third issue, and probably my biggest gripe about this interface, aside from the compression, make sure you save your profile configuration and your settings the proper way. Because when I thought I saved any of my presets onto my interface and any of the settings I changed, the power went out at my house. I came back when I turned the interface back on, which doesn't automatically turn back on, which is okay, whatever. None of my presets came back on. It kind of went back to its default configuration that it came out of the box. I could then go back to my presets and then open them from there, which is why this button is blues, because that's my preset configuration if something ever did happen. What I figured out though is that whenever you go to save your interface presets and your settings, there's not really a save button. What I've noticed is that you actually have to manually power off the interface and turn it back on. But don't unplug your interface, because once you do that, you have to reconfigure your settings once again. Now, once you do that power cycle, you should be good. But again, if you make any kind of changes in the settings or in your presets, at least make sure you've saved your presets, manually power cycle your interface, and you're all set. I thought it may have been a firmware issue, but I'm on the latest firmware version, which I think is 1.0.2. Either way, most interfaces don't really have that kind of save function, or at least have a way to automatically save the settings without having to do all this. Even my Matrix Studio, which has two different files, one for the settings and one for the monitor profile, in the preferences of the Dadman software, you actually get the ability to either manually save it yourself, or don't save whenever you make changes, or whenever a change is made, it automatically saves to that file. Pretty self-explanatory. The Mbox either doesn't make that clear, or there's no way to do it on the Mbox. What are your thoughts on this interface? Do you think I'm wrong on any of the issues I have for this Mbox Studio? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for stopping by. I hope to see you in the next video.